Welcome to the Village of Lake Bluff Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals special meeting on September 20, 2023. Roll call, please.
Yes. Member Danley? Here. Member Fisher? Here. Member Miller?
Here.
Member Russell?
Here.
Member Toll?
Here.
And Chair Peters?
Here. The form of the PCZBA is physically present at the meeting. In regards to Member Sorensen, a notice was received in accordance with village policy, and Member Sorensen will be deemed authorized to attend the meeting electronically unless a motion objecting to the member's electronic attendance is made, seconded, and approved by 2/3 of the members of the PCZBA physically present at the meeting. If no such motion is made, then Ann's request to attend the meeting electronically shall be deemed approved. Hearing no motion, she may participate. Agenda item number 2.
Yeah.
Non-agenda items and visitor public comment time. We do allocate 15 minutes at the beginning of each meeting to allow for any member of the public to address the board on any matter that's not on the agenda tonight. We request that they limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. Anyone in the audience wishing to approach? Hearing none. Agenda item number 3, comprehensive land use plan, existing condition report. Ms. Gable, if you want to prepare.
Yeah. So Tesco will be presenting an existing conditions report. It's one of the first steps of our comprehensive plan was completing this. And so Michael Blue is here to present. And just as a note, we are having some technical difficulties. Our AV system went out earlier this week, and we are working without microphones. So if everybody can just speak up so that the people on Zoom can hear us, that would be great. But we are recording the meetings and trying to do the best that we can. So we appreciate your patience with that. So with that, Michael, if you don't mind stepping to the podium.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the PCZBA. Speaking loud is my superpower, so that shouldn't be a problem. Want to thank you for being with us tonight. I'm joined by the rest of the team, and they'll be up and they can introduce themselves. We're all going to share the presentation tonight. So what is it that you have before you other than the dinner? It's an existing conditions report, right? This is effectively the beginning of our due diligence. We always ask when we get to the end, did anything in here surprise you? It may not have, that's okay. But what we're doing is we're collecting a base of knowledge, a base of information from which the plan will work. And so it's always good to have a place to start, and that's essentially what we're up to here. So what we'd like to do is share with you a condensed version of the materials you were sent out. We know you have a meeting at 7 o'clock, so we're going to go quick. If there is something we go past that you'd like to ask about or discuss, raise a hand and stop us. We'll try our best to leave some time at the end to have some discussion about it. But again, the idea here is just to kind of show where we are. And I know Drew is downstairs or somewhere doing the slides, so I'll either say next slide, or I'll either say next slide, or Drew will get tired of listening to me talk and he'll change the slides for me, I'm sure. So this is what we're going to cover tonight. Again, the breadth of the due diligence that we go through. The next slide, really quickly, again, just a reminder of who the team is. And again, David and Andrew are here tonight. I see that Jennifer is joining us virtually. Glad to see you. We look at this all as the team, by the way. The team is not just a bunch of consultants. The team is the consultants and all of you and the Planning Commission, the PCZBA and the staff as well. We're right at the beginning, right? And so we have the due diligence that's going on here. The step after this will be to continue to do public engagement. We're going to talk with stakeholders, which will continue to inform our understanding and where we're going. And that's really what we're about. What we hope to get from you is to add some depth to this information, either tonight while we're talking, or feel free to send an email to staff after. The question we start with is always, where are we? And clearly, we all know that being on the North Shore is noteworthy. Being on the lake, being in the Lake Michigan watershed hard anyway. And being close to transportation are part of the absolute benefits that the village provides. We always look at our neighbors. One of the things that we thought was neat about looking at this is, as a North Shore community, Lake Bluff is not surrounded by other, it's surrounded by a number of comparable communities, but also communities are a little bit different. And the Naval Air Station is here. And so there's different kinds of neighbors. There's the Knollwood area, which we know has been considered for years, not necessarily looking to be annexed, not necessarily an area that's ever going to annex. So a very diverse and interesting neighborhood that the village lives in. So a little bit about demographics. Again, these will be things that are not necessarily surprises, but are important to us to work from a base of. The village is relatively small, which is fine, which is terrific. The average household size is pretty consistent with neighbors. The median age also. Almost 80% of adults have a bachelor's degree or higher. The next slide compares this a little bit to the neighbors, if you will. And not just neighbors, but towns that the village is generally compared to or thought of. And again, a lot of these are North Shore communities of varying sizes. And a couple of things that are noteworthy here that we look at. Median age is always something that we look at, right? Because a higher median age talks about, well, there's older people. The community tends toward an older population. That might have some implications in terms of housing or in terms of community service. But you're kind of right around the median, around the mean. There's not a whole lot of difference. Population is consistent and it's growing slowly. These are common numbers for a built-out community. A little more detail in terms of age and the median. Lake County, obviously younger overall. Not unusual to see that a built-up community, an established community like Lake Bluff has got a somewhat older population than a larger geography. The population under 18, the population over 65, again, these are the kind of things that we look at to understand, do we have a different basis of population in terms of who might need services or who might need housing? And what we see here, what you see here is pretty consistent with the neighbors and the neighborhood. The idea of looking at where workers work, which is what they used to call this information, is to understand who works in town and who doesn't, and where people go to work. What's interesting is that there are about as many people, there's more people coming into town to work in Lake Bluff and live elsewhere, or that work here and go elsewhere. Not much of a surprise. A lot of the people work in Chicago. That, the train down is an established part of the community. Lake Forest and North Chicago are nearby, so those make a lot of sense. And you see here where folks come from, primarily folks from either Waukegan, Chicago, Gurnee, some from the neighborhood, some otherwise. Again, these numbers are consistent with what we'd expect, and that's what we look for. Are we looking at things that we expect, or are we looking at surprises? So far, we haven't found any surprises, so let's keep going. Spoiler, there aren't any huge surprises in here. One of the things that's always interesting is to look at this information about household formation and households that do not have children under 18. Again, in an established North Shore community, a pretty reasonable number, or the kind of numbers that we see in terms of a lot of them don't have children. A lot of them are older households. And 17%, not quite 1 in 5, are single-person households. Again, these are folks that may be seniors and empty nesters, and this may have a housing implication. The housing characteristics, I'll tell you the thing that we mostly look at here is that big blue block talks about, on the right side, one-unit structures, typical single-unit, single-family home. On the other side on the right side talks about tenure, renting versus ownership. The thing that's always interesting here is the difference between that 96 and that 91%. One of the things that we are seeing grow in the market is the renting of single-family homes. It's a function of the age in which we live. It's a function of the fact that more and more single-family homes are being rented. There are communities where large percentages of single-family homes are actually being rented, again, because people are uncertain about employment opportunities, they're unsure about where they want to live, they're unsure about the economy. These numbers are close. We see some of them that are pretty wild. The next slide takes a little bit deeper look into the housing stock, one of the things that's always as much fun as anything to look at in a community like Bluff is when were the homes built. And this tells us the obvious that we know, is that the homes, a lot of the homes here are older, are historic, and that's significant. In terms of that vacancy rate for homes is typically not something I put a whole lot of concern in, because it's always so up and down, and it's so much of a point in time. What's really noteworthy here is that we're pretty much consistent with others. We look at a graph like this, we look for outliers, and Lake Bluff is certainly right in there with the rest. And no, I do not know why Lake Forest is 9.9%. One of the things we always consider is the market, and I'm going to focus more on the overview, and we'll skip through the other slides pretty quickly just in the interest of time. But a few things to keep in mind that we will keep forefront as we go through. The industrial market is the strongest segment of the real estate market these days. All those warehouses that you see going up, that's what we're talking about. If you get on the highway and you drive down to Chicago, you see them everywhere. You saw they tore down Allstate, and they're building 10 300,000 square foot warehouses, right? And that's going on all over. It is the strength of the market. It has been going on. It is one of the things that people say, well, where's the bottom of that market? When does it stop? There's nothing that we've seen that says it's stopping or slowing down just yet. But interest rates and changes in things certainly affect that. Rick, go back, please. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide, and then we'll go through the other questions. Thanks, Rick. The residential market for single family as well as multifamily both remain strong. There was a lot of discussion about this when interest rates spiked a little bit. But those of us that have been around for a while and remember when mortgages were 15% or more, know that the market kind of finds its value, or finds its level. And so this idea of the market remaining strong is really not a surprise. And we see it in North Shore, we see it in other areas as well. Retail is among the most pained parts of the real estate economy right now. Before COVID, we were overdeveloped in terms of retail. And you may have heard this, that COVID is known for not having created these trends, but having accelerated them. And what we see happening to retail is important. Retail will do okay at the best of the sites. Other than that, probably not so much. And office vacancy is the ugly, lonely stepchild of the real estate market these days. There is high vacancy rate all over, and it is uncertain when we'll see new office buildings built again. Okay, Drew, next slide, please. In terms of retail sales, and again, I'm not going to dwell on the numbers or data points here. Retail sales are just something that we look at to understand, again, just overall, how do we compare in terms of other communities, and these are always different based on the size of the town. But this is always an interesting indication to see how we compare to other communities. Next slide. This is kind of the most important retail or commercial slide that we have, because it talks about drive time, right? Because we don't just live in the town we live in from a retail, shopping, entertainment kind of standpoint. And so these 15-minute drive times that you see on here are always significant because they tell us two things. One, where are generally people that are going to come to downtown, that are going to come to Target, going to come from? And where are residents of Lake Bluff going to find themselves to do their shopping? We talked about the competing areas here, and there's any number of them that are very strong. Verney, Libertyville, Vernon Hills, Lake Bluff, Highland Park are all the commercial areas here. What's clearly the most significant point here is that downtown Lake Bluff is unique. And the unique experience of a dining or shopping experience is really what the market is about these days. So that puts the village in a strong position there. The next slide shows the retail submarket that we're in. And again, nothing in here is surprising. This is all just information we look at to understand where we are and how we compare to others. Let's keep going again, just in the interest of time. We can talk more about these later if we like. But what's important is to understand the competitive alignment, if you will. Where are other places that people shop? Or what are other places that people are looking for experiences? Again, and you can see the list there in terms of Hawthorne and Market Square and downtown Highland Park and even Northbrook Court as being the kinds of places that residents go. You know, do these compete with downtown Lake Bluff? I don't know. It's such a unique experience. Maybe Marketplace, downtown Lake Forest has got some of those similarities and maybe some different trends. If you've been to the restaurants in one place, maybe you go to another. But those other ones are very different experiences, and we think that's important. As we apply this information, what we'll say is, we're not going to try and compete with these areas, but we're going to make Lake Bluff the best we can. The next slide talks to us about the industrial market. This is significant in Lake Bluff because of the business park. And so we want to keep track of what the market is, what the market is like. We don't expect that there are going to be 10, 300,000 square foot buildings built here because there's not a site as large as Allstate to be torn down. But it's important to understand that that might be part of the market. We have client communities that are seeing these folks knocking at their door, and there's a bit of a policy decision as to whether or not the trucks and the activity that they generate are the sort of thing that we want. So this may be something that we talk about as much as anything else. A couple of slides about land use. Again, always significant in a built-up community. And again, no surprises on here, but we love to look at our land use patterns. And just as a reminder, the light colors, the light yellow is always single family. The darker colors will be townhomes. The bright purple, reds, and pinks are retail and commercial and industrial uses. So you see again, they're on the west side. This sort of thing is really interesting, from a planning standpoint, because it shows that the community has got the industrial busy area off on the west side, and really a solidly residential area in its core. That's part of the foundation, right? That's not a surprise, but that's an important land use condition that the plan needs to respect and follow up with. The next slide speaks to the zoning, which is the development regulation, which is PCZBA, you all know well. The thing we look for here is the extent to which the underlying zoning matches the land use pattern. And again, for the most part, it does. It leaves some questions in terms of future development of some of the larger properties, and that may be something that we talk about, but that's what the match of land use and zoning is all about. I'm going to turn you over to Andrew and Dave now and talk about the other items that were on our agenda, and I'll be back to close up and talk about next steps.
Hello everyone, nice to see you again. My name is Andrew Dunham. I'm the project planner, also with Pesca. So we're going to dive into transportation a little bit. Next slide, please. Average daily traffic, it's a huge disparity in the village, which, so on the far west side you have Skokie Highway, Route 41, and then as you get further east towards the downtown area, you get a lot more calm streets, less traffic. And so another interesting point is 176 between Waukegan Road and Skokie Highway. That's 14,900 cars per day. Roughly, we look at about 15,000 is the rule of thumb for making a road between from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, so 2 lanes in each direction, which is an important consideration. It might be helpful in the future. Next slide. Roadway jurisdiction. This kind of, all the major roads in the village are owned by IDOT. They oversee them, which presents some complications for kind of transportation updates, things like that, but a lot of the roadways, smaller streets in town are owned by the village. Next slide, please. Alongside a lot of the IDOT-owned routes are trails, so you have a very distinct north-south spine and east-west spine in the village. Next slide. So the trail network, it really supplements the sidewalk network. Some of these larger roads do not have sidewalks, but they have trails, and that kind of steps in for sidewalks. Another interesting thing is that the older portions of town, such as the part of the village east of the metro tracks, has is more likely to have sidewalks on both sides. And then you go over to the industrial and commercial side near Waukegan Road, and there aren't as many sidewalks, which just a consideration for the future. Next slide, please. The transit network, there are no bus lines within the village boundaries, but transit is primarily provided at the metro station. Transit is pretty frequent as far as metro goes, and there are a lot of connecting shuttle buses from that station. So you have Abbott, you have Rosalind, Franklin, so that really also boosts the ridership and gets a lot of people to downtown Lake Bluff on a daily basis. And so for this section, I will turn it over to Dave Kraft with A&M Associates.
Thanks, everybody. So, one of the things we look at, obviously, as we go through with everything that Michael and Andrew have done, is some of the open spaces, and as we've talked about in these plans, the environmental sustainability pieces of it. You can see the village has a fair amount of open space. Obviously, some of the residential properties have a fair amount of open space too. A lot of that's focused on park district properties, golf courses, and some of the other pieces on it. Again, fairly consistent with some of the other communities in the area, but some interesting corridors that we'll go through. Go next, Drew. So again, you're looking at things, what does the open space offer? As we look at some of these trail corridors, opportunities for park enhancement, different opportunities that we can look at for green infrastructure, environmental opportunities, some of the drainage and floodplain stuff we'll get into in that. So Lake Bluff offers a lot of those opportunities. How we connect those will be part of the plan as we move forward, as we look through some of the transportation and demographic things. We'll look at how those open space connections and trail connections all come together and move people around the community, especially as people are more local. We talked about a little bit with some of the demographics and people getting out of offices and stuff like that. So next, flood risk. That's obviously something that's been an important piece of planning in a lot of communities. Lake Bluff among those. You've got the mapped and designated floodplain along the Skokie River corridor, which is one of the primary open space corridors too. We obviously know that we've got other flood risk in the community related to some of the drainage infrastructure, some of the projects that are going on related to the underpass and some other drainage features. We'll get into this a little bit on a slide related to the lake and the environmental and sustainability issues and opportunities with that. But we do have flood risk along the lake, which we saw was a pretty critical thing to address when we had those high water conditions in Lake Michigan a couple years ago, and a lot of the bluff failure that occurred because of that. So we're looking at opportunities to do that within to look at how that's mitigated within the plan, how it's factored into regulations, and how we look at that impacting a lot of the other components of the plans. How we can use some of those open spaces from the previous slides and potentially enhance drainage in the community, minimize and mitigate that flood risk. Tree coverage, again, fairly dense tree coverage, on the eastern part of the, Lake Michigan watershed, and Lake Bluff is pretty consistent with that. I know last night at the Environmental Sustainability Commission, there's a conversation on the tree ordinance and some of that kind of stuff. Again, a relatively healthy tree coverage in the area with some nice old tree communities and stuff like that. But as we've seen with things like emerald ash borer and some of the other things impacting a lot of our trees, certainly something from a sustainability perspective that we want to keep an eye on and look at ordinances and look at those coverages to make sure that that remains part of the character of the community. Restorable wetlands. I'll point out that the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission developed what they call their RAP, or Wetland Preservation Protection Plan. It's a very interesting online application in addition to having an associated report. But they took a lot of spatial data, or this kind of mapping data, and looked at opportunities for wetland restoration within the county, because those wetland areas obviously present a lot of opportunities related to flood control, carbon sequestration, habitat enhancement, all of that. As we expect, along that Skokie River corridor is where in Lake Bluff those opportunities exist. Similar floodwater retention, a lot of that stuff tends to be overlaid here. It would be in that Skokie River corridor. This is again information information right out of that RAP plan where they tried to quantify that. You can see just, sort of fundamentally aligns with some of those, those same historical wetland areas. But again, I think the takeaway as it relates to this plan is you've got that kind of key corridor there, that we've got floodplain, but we've also got opportunities to maybe consolidate that as we look at development in those areas. How do we work with that and around that? You certainly got the ravine systems, and those are kind of a whole different thing. We had a detailed conversation on that last night with the Sustainability Commission, but those are other resources within the community that, both provide some of these opportunities, but also, some flood risk and opportunity. Similar carbon sequestration, I think the main thing to point out here, these are the kinds of things where we're looking at, again, vegetated communities, trees, how do we try to maintain that, for that carbon sequestration. This is again, one of the metrics that RAP document looked at. Again, the thing is that scope year report, provides a lot of the opportunity in the community for that. Then we'll get in a couple more slides here is the nearshore area of Lake Michigan. Lake County Stormwater is developing, or is, I think it should be published this year, a watershed-based plan for the Lake Michigan watershed, and that includes the portion of that in Lake Bluff. A couple of the things that are coming out of that is recommendations to, maintain and enhance those systems, enhance water quality, ravine restoration, address some of the sediment load to Lake Michigan. But associated but not directly connected, FEMA is also issuing coastal floodplain mapping around the country. You hear some of the big stories about the hurricanes and stuff like that. We've had the same issues on Lake Michigan. So we've got new mapping. There's a watershed development ordinance update that goes with that. That is to protect against some of those big problems we saw along the bluffs during that high water event. It's not if, but when the water will be back up there. We're trying to get out in front of understanding what we need to do to accommodate that. So, and one last slide again, the ravines are obviously a key feature of the community. I know it's a point of pride for Lake Bluff and most of the communities that have these ravines. Similarly, in that plan, the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission has an application that you can look at what ravines are in your community. There's a link to that floating around from a presentation we gave yesterday, but it's on the county stormwater website. The bottom one is the two main ravine systems, the Ravine Park and the South Ravine System. I just point out that all the green on the northern one at Ravine Park, that reflects the work that George really spearheaded in restoring that, and kind of suggests that that ravine's in good shape. The one on the south is, the mapping of that was done before we did some stabilization down there, and you can see it reflected some erosion issues. Most of that's since been addressed as part of a couple of projects spearheaded by the village. One with DOT funding, one as part of just some maintenance, things there. So those are definitely features we want to make sure are respected in the report. So I'll hand it back to Andrew.
All right, we're going to quickly breeze through plans and programs. The reason behind this is to let everyone know that this plan does not exist in a vacuum. We're building on not only the 1997 comprehensive plan, but multiple amendments and small area plans. So for the comprehensive plan in 1997, largely the goals were to kind of ride on the successes that the village has had. So continue to preserve open space, preserve character, and some diversification of housing stock. Next up, please. So the CBD land use plan, just that was an amendment, and then very interesting, the industrial commercial corridor plan in 2000 really referenced 41 and 176 and wanted to promote additional industrial and commercial development there, which has since been realized. And then the following plan, Downtown Planning Principles in 2016, on the next slide, really has largely been actualized with new streetscaping, preservation of the tree canopy, and developing gathering spaces. Next slide. So programs in the village, now that we're past the plans, we have some recurring community events, and it suggests that people really like them. Lavinia, the downtown block party, the farmers market where we held our first engagement event, and Shakespeare on the Green. These are all series events which span multiple weekends, multiple dates throughout the year. And then single events on the next slide are a collection of art festivals, fun runs, the 4th of July parade, and Rib Fest, and kind of all year round things, including It's a Wonderful Life. So these are also very popular, just not long-term considerations. All right, community character. So on the next slide, we look at the community facilities. Just kind of important things to know, important things to have access to, make sure they can access residents quickly and safely. A lot of the community facilities are centered around downtown, but then you can kind of see a spread of schools, fire departments throughout the village and in neighboring municipalities. There's a hospital nearby, Lake Forest Hospital as well, so pretty well served by general services and institutions in the village. Next slide. So neighborhoods, this is kind of fun to make. You look at the character of these different districts or neighborhoods in the village, largely based on history, but also based on a little bit of geography. So there's, of course, downtown. Old Lake Bluff is one of the more historic areas, one of the first platted areas. Tangley Oaks, it's self-evident why that is its own district. It is all developed in one, has a cohesive design language, a business park to the west, the sanctuary, and the like. Next slide. So community features, Rockland Road 176 is the primary east-west path. That's the gateway to the village. That's how a lot of people will be accessing the village coming from 41 or whether they're cycling on the path. So that is a very important stretch in the village. A really important node is the train station. That's how a lot of other people access it. And then Sheridan Road, which runs north-south. And a few edges exist in the village. Those are largely transportation infrastructure, so railroad lines, highways, and the like. Next slide. And then it was also fun to explore the architectural eras of the village. So this is a community that takes architecture very seriously. And so you start out, this is a few eras in one. You start out as a rural community, right? The first building was built in 1854, and then the community started really taking form with the Camp Meeting Association in 1876. Up till 1895, that's when you get an incorporated village, and by the early 1900s, the Camp Meeting Association becomes less influential in the community, and it really starts to develop around the inner urban. So you have the North Shoreline, which had service to Mundelein in Chicago, Milwaukee, what is now Skokie, and then from there you have this kind of streetcar suburb that emerges. So very tree-lined streets, large houses, and you hop on the inner urban, you go to work or you go to play. And so the following year, after 1945, that a lot of things changed. So next slide, please. So this, after World War II, you have the North Shoreline closes, ceases operation, so you have a more suburban development character. So you get more modern architecture. Some of the vacant properties develop as different home styles, and you get a lot of car-oriented things, which is typical throughout suburbia. And then following that, in the 70s, you really started to see the estates become redeveloped into these distinct neighborhoods, one of which is Tangley Oaks, which developed in the 80s, I believe. You start seeing more commercial activity too. So that's everything from Target to, I think, Carriageway is what it is called, and new commercial development downtown. So you start to see a focus from suburban, also back to somewhat a little bit urban, small town, downtown feel. Next slide. And just to drive the point home, the village really does care about its architecture. It has local landmarks as well as, I believe, 14 buildings that are on the National Register of Historic Places. The Architectural Board of Review reviews projects to make sure they're in keeping with village character, and the Historic Preservation Commission makes recommendations on whether certain buildings should be listed as landmarks or moved, and all sort of alterations to buildings. Next slide. Okay, and the engagement. So this is the fun part. Next slide. LakeBluff.org is kind of the home base for everything related to the plan. So that's where you get your updates. That's where all of the surveys and things live. So currently we have 120 subscribers, and I think now over 1,000 page views is a little bit dated, but that means subscribers generally means people are going to get informed whenever we have a new announcement. So that's really great for continuing engagement. Next slide. Comment map now has 65 comments. Again, this is pretty dated, even though this is only about 3 days old. So people are really engaged. They're happy to share their ideas, and people can react by liking or disliking ideas. So it's kind of fun to see what ideas people really love and what ideas are not so popular in the village. Next slide, please. We had a pop-up event where we announced it at the farmers market. Really great event. We had an ideas wall that quickly filled up, and we had really helped get the word out about the plan, pass out postcards, and have people start to take the survey, which is highlighted on the next slide. So the kickoff survey, we have well over 200 responses now. Basically, the survey is designed to get people's opinions on sustainability, housing, economic development, other priorities. What do they want to see more of? What is important? So people really prioritize walkable streets, streets for everybody, safe streets to walk on, vibrant downtown, maintaining neighborhood character, and preserving open space. And then next slide. There's also a fun part at the end where you get to describe Lake Bluff in 3 words. All the descriptions seem to be pretty good. All the adjectives they use, we have safe, beautiful, charming, welcoming, family-friendly. So generally pretty good responses, big pat on the back to the village. And then next slide. Our last part of stakeholder engagement, we will be conducting interviews with stakeholders, business owners, property owners, representatives from partner governmental agencies later this month, perhaps next month. That will be updated in the final existing conditions report, which will be posted on the website. And then I'll pass it back over to Michael.
Thanks, Andrew.
Good.
So as I mentioned a little earlier, the next thing we're going to do is, as Andrew said, we're going to continue and complete our investigation of existing conditions by doing some stakeholder interviews, refining this information, looking forward to what you all have to say about it. I want to thank staff for their help in collecting and refining this information. And this is what we work from as a way to start to prepare goals and objectives. So what that means is that when we start to do the goals and objectives, we're looking for what are the priorities, and this is one of the things we want to hear from you tonight, and moving on, given the little bit of time that we have. But what did we take from all of this? I think you might have seen some of what we took away as points of emphasis from the sections of the presentation that had more slides, right? So as the plan moves forward, as we start to identify policies, as we start to identify areas of focus and emphasis for the future, what are we looking at? Certainly character, right? The community character about the downtown, about the commercial area in the downtown, about what the downtown means to the community, about the residential character, about those different residential characters, right? That are different and complementary all at the same time. Is there something that needs to happen to preserve that, to maintain that, to enhance that? But that idea of character is certainly significant and jumped out at us as we did the analysis. And certainly your team here knows the town well, so it's always interesting to look at the data and the information to see the town a little differently than we know it. So that character jumped out. Open space and sustainability, clearly, again, becomes an area of emphasis. Right? It's here. It's probably why a lot of people have moved here, maybe why you moved here, but it's certainly something that is a unique element to the village. It's part of what makes it special, and it's part of what needs to be part of the plan. And the trail system is a part of that open space character. Trails are more and more an area of emphasis in communities that we work in, going beyond just going for a bike ride, right? Trails are now a fitness thing. They're even a commuter thing, being able to ride to the train station, being able to ride to Target, how are these things done? And again, all of this is building on what's already been done by the community and the village over the past years. I often talk about the 3 R's, that the work that we do needs to respect, reflect, and perhaps revise the work that's been done. Andrew made mention of previous plans. We covered them very quickly, but there's been a lot of planning going on. We're not starting from scratch. Never planned to. It would be wrong if we did, right? So we are building on the work that you all and your predecessors and staff and current previous staff and village boards have done. We're standing on the shoulders of that and going to keep going. A couple other things we took, obviously downtown. One of the things that we love to see is that when you saw the slide, and I know it went by quickly, but you see the slide about the downtown plan, a lot of those items had check marks next to them, right? So folks like us love to work in a town where the plan gets implemented, right? Lake Bluff is clearly a place where there's not just a bunch of good ideas, but there are good ideas that get implemented and advanced. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as we keep going through the plan. And the last one was that land use map that we had up, right? It's the single family character of the village, the family-friendly nature of the village. All those words in that word. Well, we used to call them wordles, but wordle means something different now. We just call them word slides, or word bubbles. But that whole idea of the single family character and the family-friendly nature of the community is really the other priority that we took away from all that. So with that, pretty good, huh? The idea of this report that you have in front of you is that it can be used a couple of ways. You can kind of turn through it and go, oh, this is interesting, that was nice, this was interesting. It's also sort of thing you can dig into and look at the information and look at the findings, look at the report, the data, and so on, and see if there is information in there that you want to look into further, or that you want to be added to these priorities. And this is not the last chance to talk about it. As if you've not had time to look through it, if you continue to look through it, please send an email to staff, let her know what you found, or what questions or what additions you might have, or things, most important, that are other areas of emphasis. I mentioned the 5 that we took away, but if there are other areas of emphasis, that's really also what we want to hear. So would love to hear any comments or questions that you had, but I would start with a couple questions. The first being either this presentation or in looking through the materials, did anything surprise you that you saw and you went, huh, didn't know that, or didn't think that was the case? Anything jump out at you like that? Like I said, I don't know that there were a lot of surprises in the report. I'd be curious if anything jumped out at you all.
I was surprised that manufacturing was the #1 employment base in the community.
Yeah,
I would have guessed education.
And keep in
And
mind,
I guess there's a lot of big factories in the industrial area that
right, and
employ a lot of people.
And those are all different collars too. Those are blue collar, white collar. There's a lot of different kinds of jobs that are part of that. But that kind of struck us too.
I was kind of surprised that, and I don't know whether the criteria was retail income was higher between our restaurants and our retail than Lake Forest was at a per capita. One of those just kind of struck me as, wow, I wouldn't have expected that.
And those numbers always will vary based on size of community and whatnot. That's why we look at it on a per capita basis. You know, it's not a huge market study kind of number, but there's a couple things that it potentially means. One is that folks in Lake Bluff do go out, and when they go out, they stay home. But it also means you may well be drawing people from the outside, which I think the number might be a surprise, but I don't think that finding is a surprise to me. Excellent, thanks.
I understand this is all preliminary and it's about data, gathering the data, getting information out to the public. The next step, I think, will be far more interesting versus some data being more relevant, or when you mentioned the industrial park, that I really hope and encourage that when we talk about trails and we talk about biking, walking, or perhaps mixed use, we're never going to be the big box storage facility. But I think with Lake Forest Hospital, that wasn't mentioned in this, but that's a big growth in our neighborhood, even though it's Lake Forest, it's really on our border, and I think that's gonna impact, or could impact us positively in the industrial park as well, perhaps if we think out of the box or mixed use. So I really encourage these, your team to really look at, not sort of what's been done, but what can be done in our community.
Absolutely. Great observation.
So
Thank you.
that's one thing. And what else was I gonna say? You didn't mention, the medium price point on housing. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but I would think talking to the real estate agents in town, you say you're gonna talk to stakeholders, I think that would be encouraging, just to really understand, because I find that there's so many more younger people moving into this town, and I also think that they can afford some of the homes, you know, the medium. I think the bracket's changing. And I would also like to think that this whole COVID world, or how we're changing, and, you know, the commercial buildings are suffering, but there's also opportunities, like what are you putting in place of it? Or what can we think about when we think about the use of a building? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to really kind of dig into, maybe you can't find it on data, but you can find it with stakeholders and getting to know what we have, and also understanding the changes that are around us. Like, we have a really interesting opportunity here that I think we could do something quite unusual and productive.
That's a good point, and that's why we follow up with the stakeholders, because those conversations are important. One of the stakeholder interviews that we did when we did the PRD district was the notion that COVID has actually made Lake Bluff and Lake Forest almost as if it's closer to the city. It's made it more desirable, because it is a long commute, everybody gets that, but if you want to do it 3 days a week or 2 days a week, it's a lot more palatable. And I talked to one realtor who said that coincided with a lot of the sales. Lake Forest had a spike in real estate sales after years of their not seeing that spike, and that's what they attributed it to. That's about as far as that data point goes, but I think all of those post-COVID questions are really relevant. I appreciate you bringing that up. Anybody else with a surprise, or?
Can I just ask, one thing I was surprised about, and maybe it's not all that relevant, but the comparison communities, when we look at Lake Bluff, a lot of times we're comparing, in real estate anyway, to like Winnetka, not Northfield or Glencoe as much. When we look at the entertainment piece, I think we're kind of Highwood and community functions and things like that sometimes. Does it even matter which communities you pulled, or why certain communities were there? Or?
We picked the ones that we hear, and that frankly staff also hear the village compared to more, right? We could have done the whole North Shore. We could have done, but we had to draw a line somewhere. So we picked the ones that are historically have been raised as more relevant.
Okay.
But that's why when we look, there's that map of nearby and relevant shopping areas, right? Goes all the way down to Old Orchard, right? To kind of give a sense of which direction do people move, which direction do people come from.
Most of these panels that you presented, is it the intention that they're going to be assembled in an appendix as part of the comprehensive plan, or not?
Yes. So essentially, well, not the report that you have will be an appendix to the plan.
Okay.
There'll
So
be
you would welcome edits
Absolutely.
that we don't need to talk about individually?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, let me take a couple of minutes, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Just one.
Oh, please.
The employment statistic, I was surprised that there's 2,700, 2,800 people working like Bluff live elsewhere. Is that really a legitimate number?
These numbers are always a little bit surprising and interesting. And when you take a step back and you think of the industrial park, and you think of Target, and you think of the number of folks that are working in the dining businesses in the downtown, right? At that point, we go, oh yeah, it starts to add up, but it does look like a big number, doesn't it?
Yeah. 2,700.
Would that also include like all of the landscape workers for Mariani?
No, it's, oh, that's interesting, for a landscaper who's based here.
In town, yeah, based in town.
Probably. If that's where they file information in terms of social security and that sort of stuff, yeah, it would. That's a good point.
Even though they do spread out, you know.
Yeah, yeah, but they work from here, that's a good point.
Michael, one quick question, the Lake County Wetland Preservation and Protection Plan, what's the genesis of that, or the history of that?
Nice to meet you. So, yeah, so Lake County, Stormwater Management Commission, in looking at opportunities for, you know, restoration and preservation of wetlands, and with a whole host of goals out of that, you know, water quality, you know, flood protection, habitat improvement, enhancement, went through a pretty involved and I think a fairly unique study and developed that plan. I think it was published in 2019. So there's a report on their website, and then there's also a web mapping application, which is where we pulled some of that information from. So the report itself is interesting. I mean, fundamentally at its core, you can take it as they're looking at restorable wetland opportunities, you know, either through enhancing existing wetlands or creating new wetlands. But it gets way beyond that. It's looking at, again, carbon sequestration opportunities in the face of climate change. It's looking at flood mitigation opportunities. It's looking at habitat corridors. It's looking at all of those kinds of things. So it's countywide, and, you know, I mean, it was very, you know, spatial data, GIS mapping focused, using available information, and then developing, you know, that plan for the whole county. And again, that in association with the watershed plan that is, you should be published this year for Lake Michigan, that Lake County Stormwater is also doing, forms a lot of the backbone for the environmental sustainability portions of this plan too. You know, really it's just taking the data that's already been there and consolidated. I'd encourage you to look through it. It's fun. I mean, it's an interesting, you know, kind of look at how that goes. I mean, there's an executive summary in the report that gives a better explanation of how they got there. But the mapping application in particular is kind of interesting to look at, you know, both big picture and honing in on individual properties and parcels.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it's also very generalized.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
they selected our baseball diamond where ice skate rink is as a
Yeah.
possible conversion to a wetland,
Yeah.
probably because it's 2 feet lower than the surrounding.
Yeah. And
So
might be
it's
that,
got,
you know,
it has, you gotta take it for what it's
Yeah.
worth when
Yeah,
you're
and-
looking at that much land.
exactly. Yeah, the context is the whole county, so don't get lost in the, but this isn't that. You know, it's, you know, the report walks through the process by which it was developed, but like George said, anything that's open space, even if it's pretty active park space, has the potential to show up on there for one or more of those options. That doesn't mean that that plan is saying that this is a failure if that baseball diamond doesn't turn into a wetland. It's just very subjectively, you know, identifying those opportunities.
Well, I appreciate that. That's great insight. Thank you.
We have no need to run you up to 6:59, so there's no break till your next meeting, but I would just like to take one last minute. Thank Dave and Andrew for their great work in helping to put this together. Thank your staff for their assistance in putting it together. If you've got refinements, corrections, or edits, please share them. We'll be looking at it ourselves as well. Feel free to, I can have it sent to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, please send them to Clara. We will continue to refine this information with the stakeholder discussions. And again, if you think of anything in terms of the priorities that needs more emphasis, that's really our big goal to have as a takeaway from this. Like you're talking about the things to think about and look to in the future. Any other thoughts like that, please send them along. That really means a lot to us and keeps us focused on what the plan needs to highlight. So with that, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for your time. We've enjoyed being with you tonight and look forward to seeing you again soon.
No, thank you very much. I think it's extraordinarily well done. It's very enlightening.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Drew.
Before we transition, a couple of
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.